1941. Two philosophies of tank design. German approach. Perfect engineering. Precision manufacturing. Each Panzer IV took 12 weeks to build. Soviet approach. Good enough. Fast production. Each T-34 took 3 weeks. German tanks. Beautiful welds. Tight tolerances. Complex transmissions. Soviet tanks. Rough welds. Loose parts. Simple mechanics. On paper, German tanks were superior in every measurable way. On the battlefield, Soviet tanks won. The T-34 wasn't the best tank of World War II. It was the most effective. And it came from a designer who defied Stalin, drove 3,000 kilometers through winter to prove his concept worked, then died before seeing his tank in combat. This is the story of Mikhail Koshkin and the T-34, the crude Soviet tank that terrified the Wehrmacht. Mikhail Ilyich Koshkin was born in 1898 in Bryansk Oblast, Russia. Peasant family. Factory worker from age 13. Drafted into the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. Wounded twice. Survived. After the war, he studied engineering, not at a prestigious university, at a technical institute, but he was gifted. Exceptional spatial thinking, could visualize mechanical systems in 3 dimensions. By 1936, Koshkin was chief designer at the Kharkov locomotive factory. They'd been ordered to pivot from trains to tanks. The Soviet Union was preparing for war. Joseph Stalin had clear preferences: heavy breakthrough tanks, thick armor, big guns, unstoppable siege weapons. The KV-1 heavy tank program had Stalin's full support. 47 tons, 76mm gun, 90mm frontal armor. It could smash through fortifications, but it was slow, expensive, complex to manufacture. 1938, Design Conference in Moscow. Stalin and Red Army generals reviewing tank programs. Koshkin was there, junior designer, expected to listen, not speak. Stalin praised the KV-1, called it the future of Soviet armor. Asked if anyone disagreed. Koshkin raised his hand. The room went quiet. You didn't contradict Stalin. Not if you wanted to keep your position, or your life. Koshkin spoke anyway. Comrade Stalin, heavy tanks are the wrong approach. We need medium tanks. Fast, mobile, easy to produce in massive numbers. That's how we win the next war. Stalin stared at him. Long pause. Then he said, prove it. Not approval. A challenge. Build your medium tank. If it's better than the KV-1, we'll produce it. If not, you'll be reassigned. In Stalin's Soviet Union, reassigned could mean anything. Factory work in Siberia. Gulag. Worse. Koshkin returned to Kharkov with a nearly impossible task. Design a medium tank that could match a heavy tank's firepower and armor, while being faster, cheaper, and easier to produce. His solution was revolutionary. Not in complexity, in simplicity. First principle, sloped armor. Instead of vertical plates, angle everything at 60 degrees. A 45mm sloped plate deflects shells as effectively as 90mm of vertical armor, half the weight. Same protection. This wasn't new theory. Tank designers knew about sloped armor, but it complicated manufacturing. German and American tanks used mostly vertical plates because they were easier to weld and assemble. Koshkin didn't care about easy manufacturing. He cared about effective design. The entire T-34 hull became a series of angled surfaces. Front glacis at 60 degrees, turret rounded, side plates sloped inward. Second principle, Christie suspension. An American design Soviet engineers had acquired years earlier, large road wheels, long suspension travel. The T-34 could cross terrain that would immobilize other tanks. Mud, snow, shell craters. It kept moving. Third principle. Wide tracks. German tanks used narrow tracks that dug into soft ground. The T-34's tracks were twice as wide. It distributed weight across a larger surface area. In Russian mud and snow, this was the difference between mobility and being stuck. Fourth principle. Diesel engine. Every other major tank in 1939 used gasoline engines. Gasoline was highly flammable. One penetrating hit often meant fire. Diesel was safer. It also gave the T-34 longer range and better fuel efficiency. Fifth principle. Big gun in a small package. The T-34 mounted a 76mm gun, the same caliber as the KV-1 heavy tank, but in a 26-ton chassis instead of 47 tons. This meant the T-34 could hit as hard as a heavy tank while being twice as fast. The combination was unprecedented. A medium tank with heavy tank firepower, superior mobility, and half the production cost. On paper, it looked perfect. In reality, Koshkin faced massive resistance. Soviet military officials didn't like the design. The sloped armor was too complex to manufacture. The wide tracks required more rubber, which was expensive. The diesel engine was unproven in tank applications. The gun was too big for the chassis. Every design review, someone argued for cancelling the project. Koshkin kept refining. By 1939, he had two prototypes, designated A-20 and A-32. The A-32 was heavier, better armored. It was the design Koshkin believed in. December 1939. The prototypes were tested at Kubinka proving grounds near Moscow. They performed well, but military evaluators remained skeptical. One general said the tank was too unconventional. Another said it would be too difficult to produce in wartime. Another said crews wouldn't know how to maintain it. The program was in danger of cancellation. Koshkin needed to do something dramatic. February 1940. Koshkin made a decision that would cost him his life. He would drive the prototype tanks from Kharkov to Moscow, through winter, 3,000 kilometers across Soviet territory. No trains, no transporters. The tanks would drive under their own power. If they broke down, the program would be cancelled. If they arrived intact, it would prove the design's reliability. His superiors said no. Too risky. The prototypes were too valuable. Winter conditions were too harsh. Koshkin did it anyway. February 5th, 1942. T-34 prototypes departed Kharkov. Koshkin drove one personally. A small crew of engineers accompanied him in the second tank. The temperature was negative 30 degrees Celsius. They drove across frozen rivers, through forests, over hills, through mud that would have stopped any other vehicle. The journey took 8 weeks. They arrived in Moscow on March 17, 1940, both tanks operational. Minimal mechanical issues. Koshkin was severely ill. He'd been exposed to freezing temperatures for weeks. Pneumonia had set in. But he'd proven his point. Stalin reviewed the tanks personally, examined the design, watched them drive through obstacle courses, fired the gun. On March 31, 1940, Stalin approved the T-34 for production. The official designation, T-34 Model 1940. Koshkin was hospitalized immediately after the demonstration. Pneumonia had progressed. Complications developed. On September 26, 1940, Mikhail Koshkin died at age 42. He never saw his tank in combat. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union with 3.5 million soldiers and 3,400 tanks. The Wehrmacht's primary tank was the Panzer IV. Well-designed, reliable, proven in France and Poland. It mounted a 75mm gun and had 50mm of frontal armor. German tank commanders expected easy victories. Soviet tanks in previous conflicts had been inferior. Light armor, weak guns, poor mobility. June 23, 1941. Battle of Brody, Western Ukraine. The first major tank battle of the Eastern Front. Lieutenant Hans Becker commanded a Panzer IV. His unit encountered Soviet tanks advancing through farmland. Strange silhouette, low profile, sloped hull. Becker ordered his gunner to fire. 800 meters. Armor-piercing round. Direct hit on the Soviet tank's frontal armor. The shell bounced off. The Soviet tank kept advancing. Becker's crew fired again. Again. 5 direct hits, all deflected. The T-34 rotated its turret and fired once. Becker's Panzer IV exploded. This scene repeated across hundreds of kilometers of front line. German panzer units engaged T-34s at standard combat ranges and watched their shells bounce off Soviet armor. Meanwhile, T-34s penetrated German armor with ease. The 76mm gun could destroy a Panzer IV at 1,500 meters. Within 48 hours, Wehrmacht commanders sent urgent reports to Berlin. New Soviet tank cannot be penetrated by standard anti-tank weapons. Superior firepower, superior mobility. General Heinz Guderian, commander of Panzer Group II, wrote, "The T-34 is the finest tank in the world." Adolf Hitler demanded explanations. How did the Soviets develop a tank superior to German designs? Germany was supposed to have the best engineering in the world. Ferdinand Porsche, designer of German heavy tanks, examined captured T-34s. His assessment? The design is crude, rough welds, simple construction. But functionally, it is superior to anything we have produced. This created a crisis for German tank doctrines, the Panzer IV. Germany's main battle tank was suddenly obsolete. German tanks couldn't reliably penetrate T-34 armor. German armor couldn't reliably stop T-34 shells. The Wehrmacht adapted with tactics. German tank crews learned to target T-34 tracks to immobilize them, then maneuver to the sides or rear where armor was thinner. They used 88mm anti-aircraft guns as improvised anti-tank weapons because they could penetrate T-34 armor. But these were desperate measures. Germany needed a new tank. Fast. Hitler ordered 2 parallel programs. The Panther tank, a medium tank specifically designed to counter the T-34, and the Tiger tank, a heavy tank designed to outclass everything on the battlefield. Both programs succeeded technically. The Panther was an excellent tank, well-armored, powerful 75mm gun, good mobility. The Tiger was even better. 88mm gun, massive armor, nearly invulnerable from the front. But both tanks were complex, expensive, time-consuming to build. A Panther took 18 weeks to manufacture. A Tiger took 25 weeks. Meanwhile, Soviet factories were producing T-34s at incredible rates. By 1942, production had been streamlined to 3 weeks per tank. By 1943, Soviet industry was building 1,200 T-34s per month. The numbers were overwhelming. Germany built 6,000 Panthers during the entire war, 1,300 Tigers. The Soviet Union built 84,000 T-34s. This was Koshkin's original vision. Not the perfect tank, the effective tank. The tank that could be built fast enough and in large enough numbers to win a war of attrition. Let's examine why the T-34 was so easy to mass produce. The hull was made from rolled steel plates welded together. No complex curves, no intricate shapes, just angled flat plates. Any factory with welding equipment could assemble them. The turret was cast in one piece. Pour molten steel into a mold, let it cool. Mount the gun. Done. No precision machining required. The engine was a diesel V12. Simple design, reliable. Soviet factories built thousands of similar engines for tractors and trucks. The supply chain already existed. The transmission was basic. 5 forward gears, 1 reverse. No sophisticated steering system. 2 levers. Pull the left lever to turn left, pull the right to turn right. A crew member with minimal training could drive it. The gun was the same 76mm artillery piece used by Soviet infantry. Ammunition was standardized. Spare parts were interchangeable. This was Soviet design philosophy. Make it simple. Make it tough. Make lots of them. Compare this to German philosophy. The Panther had a complex transmission with 8 forward gears, final drive units that required precision engineering, interleaved road wheels that were difficult to repair in field conditions. If one inner wheel broke, you had to remove multiple outer wheels to access it. The Tiger was even worse. Overlapping road wheels, complex gearbox, extremely tight tolerances. In winter, mud would freeze between the wheels and immobilize the tank overnight. Crews had to light fires under the hull to thaw the ice before moving. German tanks were mechanical masterpieces. But masterpieces don't win wars when your enemy has 10 times as many good enough tanks. The T-34 had problems. Many problems. Early models had poor visibility. The commander's cupola was cramped. The 2-man turret meant the commander had to load the gun while directing the crew. Radio equipment was often absent in early production models. Crews communicated with flags. The ride was brutal. No turret basket. Crew members stood on the hull floor surrounded by ammunition. When the tank drove over rough terrain, crew members were thrown around inside the fighting compartment. The optics were poor quality. German tank sights were far superior. A well-trained German crew could spot and engage targets faster than a T-34 crew. But none of this mattered as much as quantity. Soviet doctrine wasn't about individual tank superiority. It was about overwhelming the enemy with numbers. By 1943, Soviet tank production exceeded German output by more than 3 to 1. In 1944, the ratio was nearly 5 to 1. The T-34 evolved during the war. The T-34-85, introduced in 1944, addressed many early weaknesses. Bigger turret, 3-man crew, 85mm gun that could penetrate even Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges. Better optics. Commander's cupola with all-around vision. The T-34-85 became the definitive Soviet medium tank. It remained in production until 1958. Total production exceeded 48,000 units. After World War II, the T-34 was exported to Soviet allies worldwide. China built copies, Poland, Czechoslovakia, North Korea. By the 1950s, the T-34 was the most common tank on Earth. It saw combat in Korea, the Chinese Civil War, the Arab-Israeli Wars, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the Yugoslav Wars, African conflicts. Even today, some T-34s remain in service. North Korea maintains several hundred in reserve. Middle Eastern nations have them in storage. In 2023, T-34s were still occasionally visible in conflict zones. Mikhail Koshkin's design outlasted him by 80 years. The T-34 influenced every Soviet tank that followed. The T-44, T-54, T-55, T-62, T-72, T-80, T-90, all used variations of the same basic principles. Sloped armor, diesel engine, wide tracks, big gun in a mobile platform. Simple, tough, mass-producible. Russian tanks still use Christie-style suspension, still use diesel engines, still emphasize sloped armor and low profile. The T-34's DNA is visible in modern Russian armor. But more importantly, the T-34 proved a fundamental principle of warfare. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. Germany built mechanical masterpieces. The Soviet Union built functional tools. The tools won. American military analysts studied the T-34 extensively. After World War II, the lessons influenced U.S. tank design. The M48 pattern incorporated sloped armor principles learned from the T-34. The M60 used a diesel engine, following Soviet practice. Even today, military procurement debates the same question. Do we build a smaller number of highly sophisticated weapons, or a larger number of simpler, more reliable systems? The T-34 answered that question. In a war of attrition, quantity has a quality all its own. Mikhail Koshkin never received the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. He died in 1940, before the T-34 saw combat. His name was barely mentioned in Soviet propaganda. Wartime production credits went to factory managers and Communist Party officials. Only after Stalin's death in 1953 did Koshkin receive posthumous recognition. In 1990, he was awarded Hero of Socialist Labor. But by then, few people remembered him. His grave in Kharkov is modest, no grand monument, just a headstone with his name and dates. The factory where he designed the T-34 was renamed in his honor. But most people who visit the city have no idea who he was. Yet his legacy surrounds us. The T-34 changed how the world thought about armored warfare. It proved that simple, reliable design could defeat sophisticated engineering. That mass production mattered more than individual quality. That the best weapon isn't the most advanced one. It's the one that works when everything else fails. From a factory floor in Kharkov to the frozen plains of Russia to battlefields across 5 continents, the T-34 shaped the 20th century. It won World War II. It defined Cold War military doctrine. It influenced generations of weapons designers. And it started with an engineer who defied Stalin, drove through winter to prove his design worked, and died before seeing his creation change history. This is the legacy of Mikhail Koshkin. Not fame, not glory, just the most effective tank ever built. The crude Soviet design that destroyed Germany's perfect Panzers, and proved that good enough, produced in massive numbers, beats perfect every single time.